For almost as long as they've existed, ancient Egyptian artifacts have been taken from their sites and circulated around the world. The tombs of pharaohs were ransacked by local grave robbers long before the first modern Egyptologists would bring their teams into the country in the early 1800s. Once these teams came into the country and began uncovering more and more artifacts, the movement of the artifacts and their cultural value would only increase. Around this time is when the issue of repatriation of ancient Egyptian artifacts would first come up. Many of the artifacts were taken from Egypt through less than legitimate means. Even in cases where Egyptian groups took some official part in the discovery effort, deceit was used to claim ownership of what was found. In one of the more well-known cases, the German team that discovered the impressive bust of Nefertiti downplayed its value, so Egyptian officials would let the team bring the bust back to Germany. Since then, various Egyptian groups have asked for the bust to be returned to Egypt, and Germany has refused to relinquish the bust, claiming that the deal was done fairly and that transportation could result in damage to the artifact. Other artifacts were downright smuggled. In the 1860s, Ramses' mummy was sold to a Canadian oddities museum by grave robbers. However, this artifact would make its way back to Egypt in the early 2000s after various North American collectors and Egyptologists recognized its value and offered to give it to the Luxor Museum in Egypt. Recently, hundreds of artifacts have been repatriated to Egypt through rather legal means. Smuggling artifacts is illegal in America. It's an antiquities crime, and this is something that Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE, would look into. In 2014, the Egyptian Museum at Cairo held an exhibition in recognition of this and of the other 8 countries that contributed in repatriating objects. In total, about 500 objects were repatriated. Amongst these, around 150 were from American investigations, namely one dubbed Operation Mummy's Curse, which looked into black markets and smuggler networks in America and in the Middle East. The director of ICE, Sarah R. Saldana, comments on the importance of repatriation, expressing that while we, ICE and the American people, recognize that cultural property, art, and antiquities are assigned a dollar value in the marketplace, the cultural and symbolic worth of these Egyptian treasures far surpasses any monetary value to the people of Egypt. This cultural worth may not seem as important to us, as the artifacts are kept safe in museums outside of Egypt, and everyone is welcome to experience and study them. However, they hold a different and more important meaning to the people, and especially the art historians of Egypt. In war-torn areas of the Middle East, the chaos that comes from the fighting allows looters to disturb, damage, and plunder undocumented archaeological sites more easily. This is something that notable groups such as ISIS already do with the expressed intent of destroying history, and the looters almost evoke that destruction and definitely add to it. Besides current relevance, this is also a matter of correcting past wrongs. Although countries such as Germany can argue that it received an artifact fairly, or that transporting it will potentially damage it, this is usually just not the case. Transportation has evolved far enough to safely bring the artifact outside of the country, and it can safely bring it back in. And in looking at the records for the Nefertiti bust, it is clear that the German team misled the Egyptian officials of the statue's value, and therefore took something that would be of great pride to the Egyptian nation. This essentially brings us back to the current importance of repatriation. Returning these objects to Egypt would more directly help preserve history, which is a source of pride for many nations, in an area where it is actively being destroyed. Any arguments about why the artifact can't be moved back, or why it rightfully belongs to a certain country or museum that is not in Egypt, falls apart there. When I went to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston recently, I got to stand in front of the diorite statue of Menkaure and his wife. It was amazing to behold something that was thousands of years old, and had the level of craftsmanship that it had. It had a commanding presence, an authority that I could recognize even now. Around it were great megalithic columns and post and lintel doorways, presumably from Egyptian temples. I felt as if I was in a different time and place. But that was it. It was an ephemeral experience, mostly aesthetic, partially academic, but the significant cultural value that it holds for the Egyptian nation does not apply to me. This is what Saldana meant when she commented that, for one group, Egyptian artifacts can hold a certain value. For the marketplace, it is a price it can fetch. For me, it was the aesthetic. But for the Egyptian nation, in light of the current destruction of history in the area, the cultural value it holds for them surpasses whatever the other values might be.